Good evening. Who all here has at some point seen someone maybe begging on a street corner, or seen, I don't know, maybe it's a neighbor that lives in a rundown house and smells bad or something, and looks at them with disdain. I know it's kind of personal, but I'm guilty of it. You don't have to raise your hand. I'm just getting your thoughts stirring. That's what I want to talk about tonight, is the passion for souls. I'm not going to talk much about how we reach people or methods necessarily, but more about our hearts and how we view people. I find it easy to, when I see someone that's, I guess, of lower class, or however you might classify them, I tend to be like, I've even said it, when you see someone begging, you're like, if you'd just go get a job, you wouldn't have to do this. And I want to stir in our hearts. I want our hearts to have compassion on these people, even though they might be able to do something about their situation. It's so easy to look at them and have a kind of a hard heart and not think about them as a living soul rather than just a person. So in order for us to have a desire to reach these people, we need to have a reason why we even do that. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about why Christ came for us. And it gives us a lot of clarity, a lot of reason, and why we should care for other people. Turn to Romans 5, let's look at verse 8. It says, "But God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." And then if you want to keep your finger in there and turn to Ephesians 2, we'll look at verse 4 and 5. "But God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us, even when we were dead in sins, hath quickened us together with Christ. By grace ye are saved." So let's look at these two verses. There's two things in both verses that correlate with each other. What are they? There's two similar things about these two verses. It's fairly easy to find.
But God.
That is, and that's not even what I was looking for, but it fits. But what's it talking about, God? That's what I'm looking for. Yeah, it says, yeah, that's the two of them. That's what I was looking for. We have love, and then we have while we were yet sinners, and even when we were dead in sins. We have to remember that Christ died for us to redeem us before we even knew we needed it or before we even cared. And it's so easy for me to love the people that I know are saved or that are close to me. But in order for us to reach people, we have to love them while they're still sinners. Christ came to earth for us because of love. He yearned for our lost soul to be redeemed to himself. If Jesus longed for us to be redeemed, what must we have in our hearts in order to minister to lost souls? There's something we need to have within us in order to help them. And it's something I think most of us have. We want them to be saved, but part of us, do we truly in our heart have a desire to help them, a desire to reach them. And that's what we need in our hearts is Jesus longed for our a renewed relationship with us that was broken. And in order for us to reach someone, we have to actually want them to be saved. It's easy for us to look at the person that they are and not really want them to be saved necessarily, or that's not what we think about right at first. Okay, so if we see, let's go back to my example at the beginning about people that are maybe begging or dirty and don't have a good life or might have an addiction or whatever it is. So, in the most basic form, what are those people? Sinners. It's simple. That's all I was looking for is sinners. And so if we can forget how they look and forget how they smell and look at them as sinners, the same as we were before we were saved, it completely changes our perspective of them, and we become, our heart, at least if I look at someone as a sinner, my heart longs for them to have what I know I have. And if I just look at them as a person and don't think about them as a sinner that needs saving, it's easy for me to overlook their needs. And then, so that's why Christ came for us, because he loved us. Why do we care about people? Like what reason do we have to care about people? I'm not necessarily looking for an answer, just trying to stir some thoughts. In 2 Corinthians 5, verses 14 and 15, it says, "For the love of Christ constraineth us, because we thus judge that if one died for all, then we're all dead, and that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them, and rose again." So, in the second part of the verse there, it says, "For the love of Christ constraineth us." If you look at the word constrain, it basically means compelled. So, we care about souls because we're compelled to. If you break down the verse kind of into my own words, because Christ died for all people, that means all people were dead. If we have been raised to life through Christ, we are compelled to share the way to life with those who are still dead. And then another verse in 2 Corinthians, actually just a little bit further down in the chapter, 2 Corinthians 5. It says, "Now then we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God." That's in the New King James. I want to focus on the part where it says, "As though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf." That's our second reason why we care about souls, is because we are ambassadors. It says God is imploring people through us. And that's basically what an ambassador is, someone who represents something else to something foreign. If we're part of the kingdom of God, then the world is foreign to us, and we're representing God to the people that are foreign. And then also to go with that, aside from, God can work in people's lives through the Holy Spirit, but aside from that, we are his only method of reaching people. The only way they experience his love, at least in a physical sense, is through us. And so that's what he's talking about by imploring through us God's love. And then a third thing I have for a reason why we care about people is in Romans 1, verse 16. It says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek." So the third reason I have is because we're not ashamed. We know what God has done in our lives, and I trust we're not ashamed. Sometimes it's hard to let it actually show to people what God has done for us, but we shouldn't be ashamed. And that's another reason why we care, because we can give to them what we have received. Another reason why we are not ashamed is because it's in one of the verses I read earlier, it talks about it being for all men. Therefore, we are required to not be ashamed of the gospel. And then the fourth reason I have for why we care about people goes along with not being ashamed, but we have a story to tell. My inspiration for this topic came somewhat from a class at Bible school, and the teacher really emphasized to us, and this stood out to me, that we're willing to share our story, our life story. Sometimes it feels like some of us that have grown up in Christian homes don't have much to share. But God does the same work in everyone. We're all sinners at one point, and we have a story to tell, and that's one of the single most powerful tools in reaching people, is a story of redemption that is experienced firsthand. We have a story to tell. It is our story for God's glory. We care about souls because we know what God's work can do. And then I want to go over some basics of our message that we're spreading to people. I have a whole list of things here, but I'll just open it up. What are things that we share with people? What are the basics of the message that we're sharing to the people we come in contact with? There's no necessarily right answers.
That God has created them for a purpose.
Yeah.
They can experience true peace, and a lot of people are searching for peace.
Yes, for sure. In a world that's broken with all kinds of unrest and conflict. Okay, so what is one thing that someone has to understand before they even want saving?
Jesus loves them,
Yeah.
even in the state that they're in.
Another thing they need to understand is that, and it's difficult to portray to people, but that they're sinful. Like, in order for someone to want saving, in order for someone to want redemption, they have to understand that they need something. And that's part of what we need to share with them, is that we are in need of something. Another thing is there is one holy and loving God. God's presence will not dwell with sin. We are guilty before a holy God and unable to save ourselves. And Jesus Christ the Messiah redeemed us through his death on the cross, and he proved his authority by rising from the dead. That's just some basic things that people need to understand in order for them to want Jesus' redemptive work in their lives. And then I have a few apologetic concepts that we need to understand. Just basically a list. The first one is our God is triune. And then a few things about the person of Jesus Christ. He is eternal and uncreated. He retained his deity while becoming man. He is equal in nature to God the Father, and he receives the same honor and worship as the Father. And then, this is fairly important, is some things we need to understand about salvation. The first one being that it's a free gift. Doesn't require any payment. It's free for all who are willing to take it. And that salvation is by faith alone, apart from works. And that faith, on the heels of that, faith without works is dead. Then I want to talk about some things that hinder us from loving people or from being passionate about the souls of people. There's many things that hinder us. What are they? Impatience. Lukewarmness.
You mentioned about looking down on others, so that would be pride.
Yes. That's a big one.
Also the kind of pride that is not willing for others to look down on us.
Yeah.
As you were speaking about seeing the lowly, my thoughts went to the rich also. Like, I would say it's probably equally as hard to talk to a rich person because they have it all, they think, here on earth. And to show them that God cares about them too, and he needs them to die to self.
Yes. It's a very good point. Yeah, it's not just the lowly that need Jesus Christ. It's all men. A few things I have. Well, there's a big one that hinders us from our passion for people that I think you should be able to get. I mean, you don't. What was that?
Fear.
Yes, that's what I was looking for. Fear. I have a list, just a few here. I have poor communication, fear of being abrasive rather than attractive. It's easy to fear that we're going to push someone away rather than draw them. Indifference. We're just indifferent to their needs. Lack of love, or just, it goes along with indifference, but simply being laziness. I want to break down a little further 3 of those. The first one being fear. in in Matthew 10:28, it says, "And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." So, what's the worst thing that can happen to us, purely from a human standpoint? What's the worst thing that can happen to us?
We die.
Death. That's, from a purely human standpoint, the worst thing that can happen to us is death. And that's, as in our human minds, it's easy to fear that. Being on the streets in LA really brings that out. I wouldn't say I feared death, but it becomes more real when it's actually, you see violence and you see things that you normally don't. And it makes you think about the brevity of life. So, in the opposite of that, what's the best thing that can happen to a redeemed person? Death, right? So that's what I'm trying to get at, is it's easy to fear what man can do to us. And if there's sin in your life, then there's reason to fear. But we don't have any reason to fear death. And so we don't really need to be fearful of what man can do to us, because if the worst thing that can happen to us is we die, which is the best thing that can happen to us, we ought to be excited to give hope to people rather than being fearful of what they're going to do to us or what other people will do to us because of what we've done. And the second one, the hindrance that I have, is exactly what Keith was talking about: selfishness and pride. We live in a community or a society that is incredibly self-sufficient. And I find it so easy to just go about my life. I go to work, come home, I eat, I sleep, I go to work. Life is just kind of ho-hum. And it's so easy for me to become so self-centered on what my agenda is that I forget that there's people that are lost. And I sometimes wonder what God thinks personally about my own life and how I go about life, and just the life of the people of this community in general. We feel it seems so self-centered to me, and I'm not accusing people of this. It's just something that I think about. Is we tend to just live life and let life happen. Does God intend for Christians to be content to go about their busy lives, unconcerned about the people around them, leaving earth lost for all eternity? It's something to think about. Is the neighbor down the street passing away unsaved, and we never talk to them because we didn't have time, or we weren't humble enough to talk to them, whatever it might be? It is selfishness to thank God for his saving grace and mercy that we must... Let me restart. It is selfishness to thank God for his saving grace and mercy that we must not be lost for eternity, having never made an effort to share the gospel. And it burdens my heart when I see people that are lost and dying, and they're never even being spoken to by people. There's a living soul that's going to eternity, and it's our responsibility to share with them. And then the last one I have is, the last hindrance for our passion is a lack of love. Just simply a lack of love for the people that we meet. John 15:13. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. This goes right along with the selfishness and pride thing and having a lack of love. But the greatest love that we can show is laying down our life for someone. And also goes back to the thing of fear of death. But it doesn't have to be, often we look at that verse, and I think in that sense it's talking about our physical life, but it doesn't have to be our physical life. We can lay down our life for someone. It might be our time or copious amounts of our money or whatever it is. We can sacrifice for other people, and that's the greatest love that we can show them. God forbid that we have such a lack of love for the souls around us that we neglect to offer them the hope of Christ. And then I want to close with a quote from Ruth Ann Garlock that really stood out to me. We have a humanity that is too precious in the sight of God to neglect. We know a remedy for the ills of the world that is too wonderful to withhold. We have a Christ who is too glorious to hide. We have an adventure that is too thrilling to miss. God bless you.